I'm doing great. We came off the back of covering TIA qualifiers. It's still ongoing. I think we might have a hand in China when that's announced, but it's been a good year. Been doing good so far, despite of all the stuff going on with COVID and stuff. It's been relatively good, career-wise and personally, quite nice. Well, I'm a Dota 2 caster, based in Philippines. My name is Johnxfire, known as Johnxfire. My full name is like John Nathan Fernandez. It's a mouthful. Been casting since 2017, I think. I guess professionally since 2018. With Mike that entire time. The first cast I ever did was 2013 in some RD2L. Yeah, Red Dota 2 League. I covered like a Southeast Asian scrim for my team. And I covered a couple of games in the Europe side as well for a couple of board people. So that was my start. It really took until 2017 when I really went into Echo League and met Mike. That's where it really kicked off. All right, so that's the funny story. The way in my head me and Mike met, it's a bit different. Like I remember I was acting as admin in the league we were casting in. I was acting as a bit of a moderator. So I'd set up lobbies, I'd get the players in, I'd launch the game, I'd talk with casters, talk with people, make them comfy, and let them go. I think during that time, Mike was like one of the only casters doing Southeast Asia. So we were having conversations, we were having fun. We didn't really cast together yet. And I wasn't really casting games in Southeast Asia too much. The long form of it was, I never intended to cast in that league. What happened was, Echo League lacked Southeast Asian casters. So they only had Mike, I think they had Stinky Pie, maybe a couple more that I forget. And it was actually Moxie who was like looking for people to cast. I was like, I approached her, I told her, if you really need someone I can cast, here's some of my really old VODs. And she let me cast. So I started casting a bit. And at some point, me and Mike, we talk a lot in lobby, we ended up casting one game together. And it just went from there. Like, we were already friends beforehand from talking a little bit. He casted a couple of our games as a team in that league as well. And we just hit it off and just went from there. No, not pro. Definitely not pro. It was an amateur league. Like, we bracketed it by MMR. So I think my team back then was within the 3 to 4K MMR bracket. Not pro at all. Like, that was a long time back. With his friends, but it was a good time. Amateur leagues, like no prize pool, no nothing, just bragging rights, just an opportunity to play in a more formatted structure for casual players. So it was a fun experience. Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Like there's a lot of Filipino casters. Most of them tend to cast in Filipino. Everyone knows Lon and Duno, the guys who had the voice lines, Lakad Matatag and stuff. When it comes to English broadcast, I think it's a hard thing for a lot of local talent, and that's where I was really fortunate because when I found Mike, I was based in Singapore, right? Like I wasn't casting from the Philippines. I wasn't really in touch with the local scene for casting because I was joining more of like these inter-regional amateur leagues, stuff like that. So I had more interaction with different people outside of the Filipino scene, and I think that helped. But yeah, I think that's fair to say. I know a couple of Filipino casters now on the up and up, but I think they're tending to cover elsewhere, like say Valorant and stuff. I think there's some big Filipino names rising up, but definitely for Dota 2, it's a lot harder for basically anyone. I don't think it's just Filipino, basically anyone to break out, and I think in that sense I'm just really fortunate. I think it's just really down to opportunities, and it's not just limited to Filipinos. I think there's a lot of Filipino speakers who speak as good as I do. Native speakers raised with Filipino. Some of them are half Filipino. Some of them were raised abroad for a bit before coming back home. So there's not a lack of talent, and there's not a lack of clarity and diction from those talents as well. It's just opportunities. Like a lot of these Filipino casters, most of them work with local studios, like say Lupon, Wombo X Combo. They work with, I think, way back when you had Mineski that used to do broadcasts, and most of those studios stick to Filipino coverage. They know their audience, right? Like they broadcast mainly on Facebook, sometimes on YouTube, and they cater to a Filipino crowd. So a lot of times, even if they'd want to cast English for a lot of these local casters, because they want to sustain themselves as well, they end up joining local orgs, which sort of limits the scope a bit. At the same time, these guys are pretty big in the Filipino scene as well. I think they have way more followers than I can hope for, so they're doing well for themselves despite that. They're still around. I think they had a bit of a reshuffling with some of their head staff, and as far as I know, say Lon, I believe, moved on to a different studio, joined up elsewhere, and they had a bit of a refocus. Like they don't have a Dota 2 team. They've been focused on broadcast for, I believe, Valorant or Wild Rift, one of those two Riot games. So there's been a shift of focus, and I think that's just kind of related to how Dota 2 is doing overall, especially in the Philippines. Like Dota 2 is still big in the Philippines, yes, but mobile games are bigger. It's like Valorant are bigger, and I think that's just kind of led to that evolution for Mineski specifically. I believe they do have something coming up in Dota 2. I don't think I'm allowed to talk about it, so just keep your eyes open. There might be something coming out from Mineski, but I can't confidently say. I'm just kind of on the outskirts of that one. I think for any caster, if they want to break out, whether or not you're Filipino, you have to be very comfy with yourself. Like you've got to have a little confidence when you're going in, because this is something where you're talking to people or you're broadcasting to a lot of people. So you have to carry yourself through the cast. And the best way to start, if you haven't started yet, is to just cast games. Look for some of the amateur leagues still around. Echo League is gone, where me, Mike, Moxie, Richie, I think even the Swordfish was there and Nomad was there for a while. But Echo League's gone. You still have stuff like AD2L, ATDL, RD2L, I think is still alive. All these amateur leagues are really good launching points just to get some practice in, just to get comfy, maybe even find a co-caster, as that's really beneficial in the long run. So just start casting. Like, don't be scared. Look for these leagues. Talk to the admins. They're almost always happy to have someone on board to broadcast those games. That's a good one, because when I started out, I played a lot of Dota, but mainly unranked. My MMR wasn't that high. I mainly played for fun back when me and Mike started in 2017 or so. What made me switch to analysis was the fact that Mike is such a great play-by-play, and I think he kind of mentioned this before, but I was a big fan of Mike, even before he was anything big. I was like listening to him cast these low-tier games. Like, they are not great games to cast, to be fair, in the amateur leagues, right? Like, it's not high-level Dota, it's just usually friends, maybe some serious stacks in the higher ranks, looking to make some small pocket money and something, but mainly for fun. And the reason is why I'm doing analysis is because I'm working with Mike, and I just kind of shifted towards it because it's the best seat in the house when you're listening to a great play-by-play. You're there as analysis, you get to hear that live and contribute to it. Just kind of worked out, and yeah, it's just funny. I started as play-by-play, especially in solo casts. And I still do some play-by-play, to be fair, like especially in some of the smaller tournaments I've been helping out with in the Philippine leagues, like, say, TNC, their community cups, and esports circuit cups a couple of times. I have taken play-by-play, but I am definitely much more comfy now in analysis after all that time with Mike. I think it would be more than troublesome. I think if I tried play-by-play, a lot of people would just turn off the stream. It's an instant mute. I think those tournaments I cast, I think I tried to do my best. I don't know if it's up to par, so I think it's for the better that I am on analysis instead. I think with me and Mike, it's really our chemistry is a big part of it. We just really hit it off. We know how to bounce off each other. We know when someone's joking. We know how to lean into each other's cues very well. We know how to flow with each other. That's just really hard to build up as well. Like, when we started in 17, 18, you would really notice the pauses, right? Because you're talking online. There's already a slight delay with transmission. Mike's in Australia. I was in Singapore, and then now in the Philippines. So there's always that slight delay as well when a mic cuts off and when you feel like you can speak. So I think that chemistry plays a big part in really carrying through the flow. I think as an analyst as well, it's being a local of Southeast Asia definitely helps in kind of exposing people to the local culture, maybe some of the meme culture as well. We tend to try to invigorate our casts with some of those facts where we can, and that's pretty much it. I think it's down to the chemistry. I think the analysis is still on point and stuff, but what really stands out is how me and Mike work together. Yeah, I ended up in Singapore for university, right? So I went to Singapore at, I just turned 17. I went to my university, Nanyang Technological University. I was on scholarship. I spent quite a few years trying to work out my academics. Didn't quite work out, a lot of really complex factors. But yeah, mainly university troubles. Once uni was kind of dropped out, no choice, head back home, reset. We were kind of in the middle of casting then as well. So I think the jump home has allowed me to really focus a bit more, especially when you consider my living condition in Singapore is a bit interesting. I was sharing a room with a friend, and it wasn't quite the ideal having your friend right next to you while trying to do a professional broadcast. I think some of those earlier casts we did officially can definitely see a bit of a struggle there on my end trying to work it out. I think it's when it comes to the casting, I think we're always looking to improve, try to vary it up a bit more, get some more excitement going, knowing when to change the tempo on play-by-play end. For me, it's more about looking at keeping up with meta, looking at specifically each team, the basic stuff that every caster does. I think on top of that, what really sets it apart is probably content as well. Like, we have dabbled a bit in content, but considering how much work we've gotten, at least since Season 2, it's been a bit hard to kind of keep up with pumping out, say, analysis of teams, interviews of our own with players on a more casual scale, stuff like that. It's really tough to keep that kind of production schedule and also manage your casting schedule, keep up with the games. But perhaps content's one, but, in terms of casting, we're happy with it, but there's always room for improvement. And I think it's a good spot to be in when you're kind of happy with what you're doing, because you're not constantly beating yourself down, but you always got to strive to be better. And I think that's something me and Mike do kind of keep in mind every single time an event is over. Oh, that's a rough one. I think we've had a good year. I think our casting's really shown up. I think a lot of people have expressed enjoyment for how me and Mike work and what we bring to the table. Realistically, I am a bit of a pessimist. I would say 2 out of 10. I think in terms of how we've done, I would say 8 out of 10, but it's not purely based on performance. There's a lot of things behind the scenes. I don't know if we've made enough of a splash to get the attention where it's needed, as it tends to be. You really have to catch certain eyes to get to big events. I mean, it's just tough. Like, if you look at me and Mike, it looks like a hard sell because, yeah, we're doing great, but we haven't had a LAN. All of our major coverage from DL Paris Major was all remote. So I think some TOs or maybe Valve might be questioning whether or not they're, if we're worthy or if we're ready to go to TI. I don't fault them for that at all. But yeah, I think I'd say 2 out of 10 just from contributing factors in the background beyond just casting ability. It started rough. Me and Mike were lined up for a live event, our first actual LAN together. Like, there was a TO willing to fly us out, accommodations, all of that, pay us for an event where both of us would be casting together. It wasn't the biggest event, and it was relatively regional in scale, but I think we were slated for that at the start of 2020, if I recall right, like within January or March, and kept getting postponed, and then suddenly the outbreak happened, so that was called off. So we were pretty sad about it. And there was that long period of time where it was declared a pandemic. We weren't getting as many online tournaments yet. I think slowly but surely we got BTS Pro Series 1. We had ESL 1 online for Thailand and LA. They transitioned online. And it was at that point where we're kind of steadily build up. Like, we were trusted by BTS to cover some of their series. We had opportunities coming out from that. We had really good coverage of Southeast Asia. And overall, after that rough start, I think it built up pretty well. Like, there were a lot of online tournaments, at least in 2020, and it did manage to sustain us quite nicely and help us improve and, of course, have opportunities to cast. So overall, I'd say COVID has been a bit of a boon. Like, it's a rough time for everyone. but the transition to online presented us an opportunity. We just happened to be in the right spot of our casting careers that we've been doing remotes for a while. That it actually did give us more opportunities that I think we would have had if LAN events were still happening in 2019, 2020. I think that's the funny story. I always had a bit of a liking for casting. I remember, I think my biggest inspiration back then was Ayesee. Ayesee, casting TI3, TI2. Always enjoyed that. Always thought it would be a fun thing to do. But I think in terms of it being my actual dream for a long time, like my actual obsession to do it, it wasn't originally, no. I think it's, I love what I do. I'm very happy and very privileged to do what I do right now, but it wasn't my original dream. I just kind of landed on it. That's just where life took me. I was very lost for a while, and I just ended up casting. It's all because I ran into Mike, because I signed up for some amateur league when I had nothing else to do in uni, and it was not having the best of times with my classes, and just circumstance just kind of drove me there, honestly. Like, I was studying to be an animator, and I think long term, way long term, a part of me still wants to do that, but in a way, casting's kind of the same. Like, you're telling a story, you're not animating it, but you're still narrating a story. You're still sharing something with other people. So in that sense, I actually do love what I'm doing right now, but it wasn't my original intention. It's just sometimes life leads you elsewhere, you know? Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I think when me and Mike started out, our first big break wasn't actually an official broadcast. I think we were doing something like ESL Birmingham when they signed their official contract for Facebook, and there was a complete storm about that, a whole ruckus on Reddit about the streams not being on Twitch, and we were casting unofficially on Mike's channel, just casting out of the Dota TV, following the delay rules, no sponsorships, nothing like that, according to Valve's guidelines. We were doing that, and we got some pretty good coverage on day one. And the next day, and me and Mike had a talk afterwards about what might happen with us. The next day, Mike's stream was DMCA'd. So I think that's when some attention was brought to me and Mike, just from that circumstance of being one of those community streamers lined up for that DMCA strike. And it was after that where we got our first offer, like a couple of months later. I think we got an offer to cover DAC 2018. I think that was our first official coverage. We're covering group stages for China or China qualifiers, one of those two. And it's a big opportunity. I don't think we would have gotten that chance if we didn't get that attention, but it was tough. Like, I know beforehand, Mike was already trying to break in before that whole DMCA thing. He was already trying to get people to pay attention, trying to get tournaments to line up, and he had a couple of smaller online tournaments, but they were only paying for a solo caster, so he took them by himself. And I think the roughest part starting out is not only just getting those gigs, but also the finances of it, like paying rent, paying for your living expenses. From online coverage back then when we started wasn't fantastic. I think it's a little bit better now, looking at how our other casters are charging and how much we're able to kind of negotiate now with tournament organizers because of that added emphasis on online tournaments. I think, again, that's a bit of a byproduct of COVID shifting production online, and TO's realizing that online production is pretty important. So it's been a bit of a boon. I think newer casters, there are a lot of smaller tournaments now as well that I know are looking for coverage, but then you also have to deal with payment schedule. That can vary between tournament organizers or just vary between who you're talking to in an organization. That can be tough. I think if you're looking to self-sustain yourself in casting, beyond just getting the jobs, actually sustaining yourself off the jobs is another different challenge. I'm sort of privileged as well in that I'm living back home, so I don't have to worry about additional expenses like that, but in the circumstances of say, Mike, he's supporting someone else, he's got his own house, he's got to maintain, he's got to pay rent. It is a bit tougher to balance that checkbook. I think it's great. I think ever since we've had players going out, We've had teams going in from Southeast Asia and getting those upset wins. Old TNC back then with Raven, Gabby, I think Cuckoo, AU, Demon even on hand. And that's when people were starting to focus on some of those players. And then you had the whole players jumping out of the Philippines. Scam was one of the first few to go out from the Philippines. Played in Call, if I remember right. Complexity way back in the day. And it's been great seeing that the Filipino players grow. There's a lot of potential here. I mean, this is like Dota country. I think it's it used to be the OG game. Everyone played Dota. People would skip classes to play Dota 1. And they'd go to the net shop, stay there in the afternoons. They had to make a law preventing students from actually being allowed to play, but I don't think a lot of smaller net cafes really cared. So it's good to see that love for Dota is kind of being emphasized now by a lot of people. Like I think the scene in general, the biggest thing that the Philippine scene lacks is really a guiding voice. So you notice that era where we had Demon come in, we had 1457 come into Southeast Asia. It's a prevalent issue across the region, really, not just in the Philippines, but I think the Philippines in particular. It's very hard to pinpoint a strong captain. But individually, you know, Abed's abroad now. He's on EG, turned his back to the Philippines, as Cuckoo would say. He made quite a good meme about that as well. I don't know if it's appropriate, but I think Gabby approached Cuckoo asking him, how do you get good? And Gabby and Cuckoo shot back. It's like, you got to leave your Filipino-ness behind. Look at Abed. He left. You know, stuff like that. But I not necessary to do that. I think that's just a bit of a jib coming out from Cuckoo. But it's been good. I think hopefully, like, the Philippines keeps growing. But I am a bit worried about the future growth of Filipino Dota 2. Like, going back to that point about mobile gaming. In general, it's great. I think overall for gamers, like, the rise of mobile gaming is a net benefit. Because it normalizes gaming. People don't look down on it as much. Everyone games. Issue is, not as many people are jumping or making that transition from Mobile Legends, from Wild Rift into Dota 2. In fact, a lot of people are transitioning out, at least in the context of the Philippines. So that next generation of hotshot players from the Philippines, heck, even from places like Malaysia and Singapore, might not be as wide as it once was because of mobile gaming. I think it's been getting a lot better. Like, if you look at it from the players' perspective, there's a lot more organizations. A lot more of them are also hosting team houses now. They actually fly their players out. Even the smaller orgs, like you look at, say, 032 from last year, the Cebuana stack from Exadroid. I believe they had a team house. They had sponsorships. Admiral had sponsorships. TNC is super strong because of their popularity. OB Neon's been signing sponsorships as well to sustain themselves. I think overall the structure is getting better, even for smaller teams. Like you saw Southbuilt Esports, from Vice Esports, new org into Southbuilt and to ex-Southbuilt, unfortunately. But there are a lot of organizations still supporting Dota 2, and I think it's been great for players. For casters, again, it's been up and down. I think in the broadcast sense, like, there are more online tournaments and there are more opportunities for beginner casters or casters just getting their foot in to try to do it in an official capacity if they manage to talk to a TO. But it's still rough just because of how the job market is. Again, there's so many casters and there's only so many tournaments to cast, and it can be tough, again, just on those lower rates to go about it. But it's a lot better for sure than compared to 2016. I think for Southeast Asia, what really stands out is that it's a melting pot of different cultures. It's a melting pot of different playstyles. You can kind of see that. It used to be more prevalent where you'd see a difference in how the Malaysians would approach a game, a difference in how the Philippines would always just run you down, and now the Singaporeans as well would play a very different style. You also have this ability to scrim Chinese teams, which it was already happening before. I think there's been more emphasis on it now, considering that, again, everyone's on lockdown. There hasn't been as much international lands as there once was, so a lot more teams are just looking for a wider pool of scrim partners, and that just puts Southeast Asia at the best spot. We're right next to probably the best region right now in Dota 2, and it's allowed our players to really improve themselves in different ways. So it's down to a bit of geography, a bit of the fact that you're mixing up teams now, a lot more teams are taking players from different nationalities, whereas before TNC used to be all Filipino. They are still all Filipino, but they've got Mushi as a coach. They used to have KP on. They had Forev. They had Febby for a while. And then you have Fnatic, who's just always kind of mixing up all across Southeast Asia. It just leads to a lot more opportunities for these ideas to crash and create something new and different. And I think that's really the biggest point with Southeast Asian Dota. There's so many styles. You've got scrim partners in China. There's so much to learn, and there's so many ways to experiment in this region. I think they've got a good shot. Both teams have fairly good shots. I'd favor T1 a bit more, but Fnatic with a renewed lineup are looking reinvigorated. T1 and Death just showing up, and of course Raven, DJ Jabs have all been very stable backbones for the roster. So I'm pretty hopeful for how both teams go. I would give T1 the chance for a better run just because they've exposed themselves since the Animajor to that bigger stage, and they have kind of shown us that they can perform at that level. Fnatic, I don't think nerves will be a major factor, but again, it's the first TI for a few of those players, especially for Det. That was the spotlight for a lot of people, that finally making to TI. So I just hope that the nerves hold up. They do have some great veterans to back them up there. I don't know if they're going to have the same chances as T1 because T1's already scrimmed against European teams, scrimmed against NA teams because of being at the majors, because of being at ESL. So just in that alone, T1's going to have a bit of a head start in information. I think there's a hell lot of storylines. There are a lot of teams hoping to prove themselves. I think the NA teams outside of EG really want to show up there. Quincy Crew, Undying, they have veterans on hand. It feels like it's a clash of veterans and new players. But I think that's what everyone's looking for. We aren't done with the qualifiers yet, so there might be the storyline of OG coming back to defend their TI championship with a different roster. Who knows if they can make that miracle run? But there's a lot. I think the emphasis will be on the dark horses. All the eyes will be on Southeast Asia, South America, and NA. I think everyone's going to be looking at Undying, looking at Thunder Predator, looking at T1 and Fnatic, and see if those teams can really carry through from all the hype because of their performances in Singapore Major and Animajor for each region, and kind of show a point, right? Because the DPC system, there's been arguments over how the slots have been distributed. There's been arguments over how wildcards has been handled in majors, how the points have kind of played favorably for some regions and highly unfavorably for other regions like Southeast Asia. So I think that's what we're going to expect, that kind of discussion coming into TI. Are these regions worth the slots? Is the DPC flawed, or is it actually a great predictor for success in these tournaments? TI is going to be the big testing ground for that. That's a bit tough to say. Honestly, from Southeast Asia, Execration would probably be up there. I did not expect them to go to the Animajors myself. I think their performance before Season 2 of the DPC was always on and off. So they've been one of the runaway starts. I think for other regions, places like NA, Arkosh. I think no one expected Arkosh to hit upper div. So that is definitely the surprise. The demons coming through from Slacks. It was a really silly to cast those games as well. So I have no clue how they did it, but I think that has to be like the biggest surprise. Arkosh moving up to upper div must be like the literal showstopper. Even the fact that they went far in their TI qualifiers, I think that's just, I don't know how. I think Aoi was a big part of that as well, but they kicked him, so God knows what will happen in the next season of DPC. But Arkosh was probably my biggest surprise, honestly. Like, outside of Execration doing better, going to the Major, yada yada. Arkosh has the dankest storyline across Season 1 and Season 2, so probably that. I think I'd like to see more matches like that. It just feels so short. Like, each team plays maybe once a week, max of 2 a week. You have a couple of games per day, a couple of rest days. It just doesn't feel like a lot of games per region, and you can definitely feel that. Like, in terms of coverage as well for casters, there was a lot less to cover in a season, especially if you were covering lower div. It didn't feel like, say, when BTS Pro Series would roll around, you'd have a whole lot of games for group stages. A whole lot of teams playing each other each day, lots of action every single time. I get that there was maybe a bit of a desire for Valve to give each region a chance to broadcast without interruption, And that could be one factor that led to the DPC format as it is in terms of the seasons. But definitely something has to be done about how those seasons are dragged out. 6 weeks for the amount of games feels a little bit long. And I'd love to see re-weighting on the points. Again, there's been a lot of arguments as to how the DPC is rewarding teams a bit too much for much more consistent seasonal performances compared to tournament performances. And that disparity has caused a few upsets, especially for teams like, say, OB Neon, stuff like that, having pretty decent runs in the first major, not even making it to TI. So I think Valve will have to look back at the point weighting system. And of course, I think the prize pool has to be spread out a bit. Like, for the DPC prize pools, for NA, for Europe especially, I think that prize pools are very hard to sustain yourself on, especially, again, for the lower div teams. For a region like South America, Southeast Asia, it's a little bit easier because the cost of living, the standard of living is a lot lower, so it doesn't take as much money to sustain a team. I think we still need some of that to trickle down a lot more. Like, as it is now, it just feels like a lot of teams have not been able to really capitalize on this much more stable foundation. Like, back in 2020, early 2020, we already saw a lot of teams from Dota 2 disappear. GeekFam, gone. Reality Rift, gone. And it just feels like that might continue to happen if the environment doesn't kind of get easier for teams to manage. Well, between T1 and Fnatic, I'd, again, peg that to T1. I think they've got a pretty solid chance. March's coach is fantastic. Fnatic has had to readjust. The roster is looking good, but you never know how that roster is truly tested at TI. They haven't had a chance to play teams from NA, teams from SA, teams from EU. They might have scrimmed with China. That's the extent of it. So I think T1 will be able to use that experience a little bit better. Overall, in terms of TI, I have to admit, I think this is a Chinese year. I think LGD's been playing really well, especially in the AND Major. They just look very, very scary. The execution's been really clean, and I think China's very hungry for a TI win, considering that, you know, the cycle was broken by OG, so I think China wants, the Chinese players are very keen on getting that crown back, getting some of that national pride back for their players and for everyone watching from China. So I think the hunger from China is a bit overwhelming, and at the rate they're going, at the rate they're playing, at how they're playing, unless there's a major patch shakeup, I think every eye should be at least on LGD, if not China as a whole. Yeah, I'd say thank you for having me on, and also anyone who enjoys the cast, everyone who's been giving feedback, everyone who supported us since we weren't even casting on official channels when we were back on mic. All of you have been great. Your encouragement's been great. Your feedback's been great as well. It's helped us improve. And hopefully going forward, you guys continue to enjoy it. Like, it's fun to cast. It's fun to share the story of the game, but it's also good to know that people are actually enjoying it as well. So thank you again for just watching along with us, enjoying Dota 2, one of probably the greatest game in the world.